Kia ora koutou. Nei rā te mihi kia koutou I tēnei ata. Awesome to have our councillors here and lots of staff in the room on this important workshop. So just wanted to welcome everybody and just acknowledge we do have a few councillors away. Good to see you online, Paul. Thanks for being here. Got Councillor McKenzie, Councillor East, Councillor Burns and Councillor Ward that are away today. They've all got various family commitments and things. So just acknowledging that. And just to talk about our workshop today, obviously this has been a series of work we've been doing. I can see Councillor Sunkel's been his ambulance officer over there. Thank you, John. So, yeah, this is an important workshop in the context of what's going on for local government at the moment. We've actually been working on this for quite a few months from the start of the year, and I want to acknowledge Councillor Swiggs, our Deputy Chair, and also the staff that we've been working with, Patrick, Stephanie, in terms of getting together at the start of the year and really honing in on what's important facing this council for 2025. And this whole RMA, local government reform, really rose to the top as being quite important. So we've done a lot of work. We've had a series of workshops earlier in the year. We came up with our position statements, and then one of them was around the structure of local government going forward. And so today we're here to have that workshop. And the intent is really just to open up the discussion about what is the potential. Obviously, we know that function's really important, and all the functions that this council does are critical for our community, for our environment, for our economy. So all of those things are critical. So someone has to do them. And so we're really here today to look at those different options that are out there. And so that we're being proactive about what the plan could be going forward. I don't expect that we'll land on any of these today, but the main thing is that we discuss them, we talk about them, we look at the pros and cons of them, and then we think about where to go from here in terms of this. And obviously, the government's doing thinking about it, so we want to throw that into that discussion, so that's out there for people to think about, for people to debate. And obviously, the most important thing is that we land on something that's really the best outcome for our communities, for our taiao, and the things that this council currently has to do. So that's really the focus of the workshop. Keen to hand over to Emma and Cecilia, who's been also helping us more recently with getting this package of slides together and the structure of the workshop. So thank you so much. Hand over to you guys.
Tēnā koutou, councillors, and thank you for that introduction, Chair. It mirrors a lot of the points that I've made, so we will get into it. Before I start, I do just want to introduce the team that will be running the workshop and have put this together and are working on this today. So Cecilia and myself will sort of tag team and take you through the initial slides with the purpose of providing some context and background to the conversation. And then we have Patrick and Olivia here from the teams when we break out into the groups to workshop and assist with the facilitation. So, as the Chair said, as a council, you've done a significant amount of work to respond to the changes in the RM legislative space, which are the most sees some of the most significant change to the resource management system in the past 3 decades. So we've been really active in preparing submissions on the government's consultations, and as part of that work have developed, you've as a council have developed 5 strategic position statements, and those were endorsed at the May Council meeting, and as the Chair said, at that time it was agreed to have some further discussion around what a future structure for local government could look like, and that's the purpose of the workshop today. So it's really to provoke your thinking and support a conversation that sets the council up to respond to the external environment, and particularly engage and what a future local system could look like, and how that would best deliver on the functions and responsibilities of local government. It's a significant opportunity to drive change, and today's workshop is designed to set you up to engage proactively with the sector and be part of shaping that future system. So we've used some scenarios and a framework. It's not the intent to settle on a particular model, but rather to use the models and the framework to sort of test some principles or some positions that could be the basis of future options and engagement on this kōrero. So the workshop's been structured really to facilitate that conversation. And if we move to the next slide, so the next half hour will take you through some context. Then we've got an hour and a half to break out into groups, and we'll explain some more how that's going to work through the particular models and scenarios. And then after lunch, we'll get you back, come back together and feedback what that looks like. And just the next slide, this is really just a reminder of what you've already, the work that's already been done around the development of the 5 strategic positions and the importance of that for advocacy and influencing the conversation. So I will now hand over to Cecilia to take you through some of the background information.
Thanks, Emma. So, recognising this proactive and ongoing strategic work done by Council, the recent commentary in the media, driven largely by resource management reform, but it's really highlighted the overall desire to have a broader collective look at the local government functions and structure, and the opportunity to consider how best local government can be fit for the future. Acknowledge that there will be differing opinions and views out there, but today's about exploring those different perspectives and identifying potential commonalities and areas to explore further. Many also noted that the conversation isn't new, and different aspects of the system and functions have been explored through a number of reviews and reforms since the last significant reform in '89, which brings me to the next slide. So in late 1989, Sunday trading came just in time for Christmas, but it also was the establishment of local government as we know it today, and bringing down sort of over 800 organisations down to 86, and the creation of regional councils in time for the Resource Management Act as well. So there have only been a couple of small sort of changes, well, not small, but tweaks to the system structure since, with the Nelson Marlborough Regional Council being disestablished in '92, Banks Peninsula amalgamation in '06, Auckland Council created as we know it today in 2010. And so today we've got 11 regional councils, 11 city councils, 50 district and 6 unitary across the country. Voter turnout was its highest in '89 at 57%, and it's been declining ever since, and the last elections was sitting at 42%. So as noted before, there's been numerous ad hoc changes to local government mandates, resulting in increasing and changing roles and responsibilities for local government, significant population growth and change in the drive of that growth, shifting from natural increase to net migration. And with changing populations comes changing community expectations and societal trends, rapid technology changes. '89 you could rent a fax for $61 a month, and now here we are today, live streaming on YouTube. Yes. Yeah.
I just had a question. Councillor Davies, you had a question about this slide?
Just a slight correction that the vote increased from 2019 to 22.
What's that, Joe?
Just a slight correction. where it was said that the vote turnout has been decreasing since then. But we did have an increase between 19 and 22.
No, cool, thank you. Claire?
Yeah, just curious, when we were first formed, was there 17 councillors on the first regional council formed? So when did they reduce it down to 14? Or was that a local government act?
I think that would be through the various representation reviews. I don't have the exact when it, but I think generally there were more across the country. There were more, councillors on the councils at the time. Yeah.
And it's interesting to note, I think the number, it's about 1,500 elected members nationally, roughly, if you add those numbers together.
Yeah.
And in Canterbury, roughly 200, if you look at the numbers there, but over. Just at a quick sum, it's about 13% of the national elected member numbers, and that's about where we sit nationally with most things, population, vehicle kilometres travelled, I remember from the transport slides. So that's about the number that it probably should be, but just on its current figures. So interesting statistics. Thanks, Cecilia.
Yeah, and just also on the voter turnout, there was also an increase in 2010, which might have been Auckland Council creation as well. So you've seen this slide previously through work done on the position statements, but just, what does this mean in terms of all the external change for local government, essentially? So just to recap on that one there. And so in terms of all the work through the position statements and other strategic work done by Council through the Future for Local Government review and other advocacy work, just this slide is essentially just summarising sort of all the various considerations and opportunities you've identified through those processes. I won't read them out today, but just note that, they'll continue to be discussed during breakout groups there. But just noting one of those was around one size does not fit all, and population size and distribution is an important factor, but there are other considerations to take into account. And that's just, the slide is just to capture some of those aspects you've identified, the Papatūpa Runanga in Canterbury and Ngāi Tahu Takiwā, the recent new Canterbury Water Management Strategy model being formed around the local leadership groups around the waterway catchments as the key focus, and also where key strategic infrastructure and assets are across the land. That's just a clipping from the transport plan, but just as an example. And also
Question, Cecilia. Sorry, John.
Thank you. And it's not really a connection to you. It's the map we have on the left, which is colour coding the different TAs. We use that format in all the work we do, whether we're trying to identify constituencies. Is there a possibility of having an underlying map that actually shows roads, rivers, and context rather than just a blunt instrument? It's probably a wider conversation, but it does become frustrating when you're trying to identify boundaries and lines when we kind of use that model in most of the stuff that we put out.
That map's not the district council boundaries, that's the river catchment boundaries.
Is it?
Yeah.
Right. So again, I am confused because we have just gone block.
Yeah.
How do you define?
I think they're just there as examples of...
I'm not specifically talking to that one, but it's the context when you look at a map like that. It's how do you define where boundaries actually sit, roads or rivers or streams or the like. And we do, and we're getting into a space where we're doing a lot of that stuff. So is there an ability to overlay onto a topographical or whatever kind of a map, just to give definition? It was just a point.
I think that's ultimately through the reforms, and it's both Labor and National have been pretty consistent about this in terms of spatial planning. That will actually come then, I reckon, as well. Yeah.
And I've got no problem with what we're doing. It's just the format that these maps pop out at, and not being able to define.
These ones are purely to spark your imagination about what.
I've got no problem with that one. It's just,
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, no.
Is this paper is purely for us, for this briefing?
No, it's public.
Is it?
Yeah.
Well, you missed out one Papatupurunanga, which is Wairua, because there's only 9 there.
It's
Just
probably
be careful.
actually they're there. It's probably Moiraki's below that line there, so that's just a mistake. But it's only they're only meant to
You only
be
got 4.
representations of what's happening.
That's Arowhenua. Oh,
So it's just to make people think that there's other. Look at the heading: considerations beyond population. So there's other things to think about other than
Okay.
just where people live.
just if it is going public,
Yeah.
you need to put another one in. 'Cause
Yeah, cool.
we'll-
Thank you.
We'll get it.
Thanks, Nook. Kapai. Carry on.
Yeah, and just to notice, there's a variety of maps you could provide, but also, public service boundaries as well is another consideration there. Again, this is a slide that you've seen before through your work on the position statements. But yeah, recognising that there's lots of different pros and cons for a more centralised and more localised approach, around sort of local voice, efficiencies, strategic capability. So again, themes that will be coming out today. And with that, I'll turn to Emma now just to touch on the methodology before we get stuck into the models. Yep.
Thank you, Cecilia. Yeah, so the way we're going to structure the next session in the workshop is you'll be divided into 4 groups. And we've, in the pack, Cecilia will explain shortly, we've sort of created 4 potential or models. And again, these are with the purpose of being sort of to provoke conversation and to sort of provoke your imaginations around what some future scenarios could look like. And then against each of those 4 models, we're going to examine this framework and look at these 4 features or dimensions: scale of delivery, financial sustainability, strategic capacity, and community responsiveness. So it's really to test those against the 4 models, and we'll provide some more information. If you just go, we'll come back to the detail on the models. So these 4 dimensions, there's a bit more explanation around those, and these are some of the questions that we'll be working through and pose to you in the groups. So you'll move around and discuss each model and have a discussion around these dimensions and the pros and cons.
Yep. Vicky?
Yeah, on that criteria, the criteria framework, another thing that seems to me that's important is actually stability, which isn't really covered in there. The sort of stability in terms of, frameworks and, consistency over time of the way that we apply consenting the decision making around consenting and so on.
Yeah, good point.
I think this will sort of provoke quite a lot of thoughts, and we will tease those out. So these are designed to sort of be a starter for 10, and there is quite a lot more depth behind this, but we've tried to sort of capture. But absolutely, you'll already, I think it's great, you're kind of thinking about, right, what are some of the areas? So this is kind of to provoke the thinking, and we'll explore
agree.
those in the groups.
Councillors, feel free to bring other thoughts to it. And I think your question there, stability, can relate to that second or third question, what scale of transition may be required. It's sort of a other side of that. So I think you can relate it to some of the stuff in there, even though the headings might not exactly match. But it is to give you something to go back to test each model against. But obviously, if you've got other thoughts about those models, then feel free to share them. You should. And I suppose the other thing that's important to say is that these are 4 scenarios that we've come up with to provoke thought. If there's other models that you're thinking about or have got, then feel free to throw them into the mix. If you feel really strongly about a model that you're thinking about, then maybe we write it up in a parking lot somewhere and we think about that at the end of the day. Because, we're not saying these are the only models. They're just some that we've done a bit of work on and we've come up with to give you some food for thought. So definitely, if you've got other ideas, then start jotting them down, start thinking about them, and let's throw that around later in the day. Kapai? Yeah, I'll go to Grant and then to you, Nick.
Yeah, I was really, in terms of the first one, scale of delivery, for me, it is being able to explore or consider the functions that are applying to these models. Presumably, that's we can comment on those about the appropriateness of functions within each of those models.
The functions are listed on every model, so and they're taken really from the Wild and Winter report as it's mentioned there. So we've looked at all those functions. We've tried to allocate them across the different parts of that in each model. So there is that background work around the Wild and Winter report that is there as a basis. So that lists every function that everyone does, including central, regional, and local. So they're definitely there and definitely discuss them. Yeah. No?
Yeah, I was just wondering, it might be here, how. So you've got you're talking about elected members, and then you've got the mana whenua, whether that is also under like a representation bill or something like that. That's what we...
Yeah, well, in every one we're trying to say mana whenua representation should be there because it's one of our values that if you go back...
but what is it though? I mean...
We don't know, but we're saying how do you factor that in? It's mentioned so that it's a discussion point. That's for you, I think, and Jan and others to go, what do we think that model how could it work? So I think you've got to throw that into the mix.
I think we wouldn't want to go backwards from an Aotearoa Representation Act.
That's right. Yep.
Okay.
I'll probably just put it out to you that if there isn't an Environment Canterbury or a Canterbury Regional Council, then there is no Representation Act either. That's all I'd say. So you've got to be thinking forward.
Well, that's what I'm thinking about, is that how do you transfer that across where it becomes a representation bill that covers...
Well, I'm hoping that it's a principle that everyone agrees with so that every model should have mana whenua representation. How that gets actually mechanised in the system, don't know.
Yeah, because keep in mind, we've been to that hangi before because we've had people sitting here without a vote.
So definitely throw it into the mix and say that's a... And if you go... Can you go back to that slide that does set out what we've heard from Council before? Because I think that's a really important slide. In a way, this is saying what we've already agreed as a council before and what we've said in different workshops around these matters. So I just think you've got to keep them in mind. They're like our sort of bottom lines in a way. So I think that's really important, and that's there. How do we... The representation, I think, is inherent in that second bullet point, but raise that in the discussions for sure. Kapoi, any other questions before we get into it? And I'll go back to the team, of course.
I would also note on that second one, that is the position statement that was endorsed at the end of May. So,
I'm going to hand over shortly to Cecilia to describe the models, but I just want to make the point, this framework, we looked at quite a number of options of frameworks. We've taken this from a report published by Martin Jenkins on autonomy and authority. There are a lot of variety of frameworks, but we liked this one in the regard that there was sort of some consistency across the nation and the work that's been done and the conversations have been having. So we thought that it would be useful to sort of have, that's why we kind of selected this framework, part of the rationale behind this framework. I will, to keep us on track and so that we've got really good time to workshop this, I'll now hand over to Cecilia to describe the 4 models.
Thanks, Emma. So, the models, as Emma mentioned, scenario sort of provocative model, so we haven't worked out the finite details. That's just, really just a test principle. So I'll just briefly summarise them and just try and point out a few of the sort of key differences between them. So this one here, the combined council, it's kind of a hybrid of the Greater Manchester Future for Local Government recommendation on a combined council at a representation level, combined with the Wild Winter report on functions and the discussion there. So under this model, still got local councils and representation at that local level is maintained. And those mayors then form part of the combined council with a regionally elected chair and mana whenua representation as well. So the combined council, they are working with central government with input from the local councils to determine regional priorities and make co-investment decisions for both combined and local councils. So the local councils are primarily focusing on that place shaping component, advocacy, local issues, services and rates, and the combined council largely current regional council functions and issues that cross boundaries, and other functions that have been agreed that more suitable at a regional scale. And then there are sort of functions that may be delivered at multiple levels, and provisions for shared services under this model. So roughly we'd be looking at sort of 124 elected members, similar to what we've got now.
I think the key thing about this one is it's sort of a cascading model, so that you don't have separately elected regional councillors other than regionally elected chair, and those mayors or chairs of each local council become the regional council. That's the key thing to think about in this model. It's sort of like the mayoral forum model, but with teeth or whatever. So that's the model. And I think it's worth pointing out that the 10 local council things, we've just kept that simple in terms of the current 10 local councils, but obviously there could be some amalgamation that went on if you went for this model that changes that number or whatever. So that's just something to think about. Cool.
Okay, so just to touch on the unitary councils one. So this is one of the models recommended by the Future for Local Government. It's obviously in place in other areas of New Zealand, and sentiment of some recent commentary as well. So in this model, it's pretty much status quo in terms of where the functions sit, but they're all sort of in one council, with regional and local council functions within one council. And you've still got community or local boards under this, providing that sort of local advocacy input into decision making. Delivery of council functions can be under delegation through sort of service entities for some of the bigger operational services like transport, building control, housing, water services, flood protection and waste. So this model is a bit different, and that's we've provided some models within this. But again, as the chair mentioned, just having some kind of flexibility around the review of the boundaries and the potential numbers. But so the first one being up to 10 unitary councils. The second one, this one is actually maintaining a regional council, but for the area beyond Greater Christchurch. So there would be one unitary for Greater Christchurch, perhaps like Auckland, and then in the rest of the region, there would be district councils and a regional council to provide regional functions as we know today. And the third one being 3 unitary councils. Not necessarily those boundaries like that on that map. That's based on the current boundaries, but just 3 unitaries across.
I think a key one on that, is obviously we've just gone keep it simple about the current boundaries of current local councils, as well as the Greater Christchurch Partnership boundary that is currently in those partnership plans. But obviously that could be up for debate. So in those groups, definitely talk about that. Does it mean that the Greater Christchurch boundary is a bit bigger, takes in maybe all parts of those 3 central district councils, and then you have the rest? So that are things that you can discuss in the groups. But the idea is that you can see there's 3 different ways you could potentially cut that. There's probably more as well, but just all good. Let's go to the next one.
Yep. And so this one's the Regional Environmental Leadership Body. So sort of the key difference with this one is the Regional Environmental Leadership Body, that's 50-50 appointed and elected members, plus Mala Whenua representation. And this body is solely focusing on environmental functions, relating to planning and permissioning across all the environmental domains and natural hazards. So local councils, they're focusing on the place-based functions. And thank you. There's a number of regional or local entities or sub-regional entities for service delivery, again across some of the major services around transport, water services, flood protection, and waste. Under this central government, so they have got entities delivering compliance functions, science, environmental monitoring, and so they are providing those as services to the regions. And then there's other functions picked up by central government where there's minimal local discretion in delivery, or some sharing where roles and responsibilities are clear, different levels of expertise are required, or where things are generally working well, like civil defence. Under this model could be up to 130 elected members.
Key thing about this one is just having a demarcation between that regulatory function in terms of who's dealing with plans and permissions, so that say in a unitary example, you're not marking your own exam sort of thing. So it's just trying to create something different there. And obviously those central government entities, they could be regionalised or they could be regional sector together doing some science monitoring functions as a joint entity. So just think there's lots of variation in here, but it's just food for thought. Yeah, John?
But just looking at it, the question of removing science, I guess, from the regional entity and going, we do the permissions, but we don't have the science to back it. So I guess I have a question of, should the science sit in that space? And again, the civil defence one, a regional entity under the Act sit at the moment. So whether that shouldn't possibly sit in the hazard and risk in that space. Those are the two questions for me. If we split too much, that's a conversation for later. It was just my first impression of that one.
Great, John. I think you should, if you feel like that, put them back in and put that into the debate. Yeah, because I have similar thoughts actually. That I think that makes a lot of sense. So, thank you. Can we carry on? Yep.
Yep, and finally, the Canterbury Assembly, which is probably one of the more sort of transformational, provocative ones today. So, this is essentially community councils and representatives elected based on 5,000 of the population, so having about 20 community councils across the region, headed by a mayor, and those would be centred around sort of townships or wards or known districts, and there would be no community boards under this. So essentially, the community councils would be working more like a community board or local board as we know it now, providing those local advocacy and recommendations to the Assembly. Then in the Assembly, there'll be 20 elected members, so to represent each of those community councils. And mana whenua representation, and so largely focusing on those regional functions, and the main organisation would sit under that Canterbury Assembly as well. And then the regional mayor that would be elected at large to chair the Assembly, their key role there would be to really be the advocate for the region with central government, other regions, and also internationally. And again, under this model, options for different regional and sub-regional entities supported by government funding to deliver infrastructure and capital projects and those services as well.
So it is similar to the first model in terms of the Manchester system, but it's more proportional in terms of those local communities have their own community council, and representatives from those communities go up to the Assembly. So that's sort of the key one there, I think. Any other questions? Should we carry on? Thank you.
Yeah, and just tonight there's a bit of a highlighter, but just reviewed the sort of total number of elected members there. It would be around sort of the 130 plus mark. That is it in terms of the models. So Emma will
move on to the next slide, and I'll. Great. So making good timing. So we've got the next hour and a half before lunch to now break into breakout groups, and I can sort of almost feel and see the ideas that this conversation sparked. There's a lot of information there to go through. So we've got 4 groupings, and I'll go through those shortly. So the way it will run, we'll have one group in the councillor lounge, and then we will use the chamber here to sort of have 3 other groups. Then you will rotate with your group and a facilitator through the 4 to discuss the 4 different models. So sort of 15 to 20 minutes for each discussion, and we'll come around and timekeeping, and then we'll come back, as I said, as a group after lunch to kind of share the thinking and the ideas.
Just a question. So at each 15, 20 minute, you'll ring a bell or just let us know to move on?
Yeah.
And are we just writing on a white sheet or something our ideas? Yeah.
Yeah, I think we'll talk about that in the breakout rooms, but we've got a structure there and some sheets of paper for you to write down and share your ideas. We'll get you to put those onto post-it notes so that then we can actually gather those up in the break and kind of try and look at how the information's perhaps themed up and feed that back to you. Do you want to jump in?
Oh, it's just one with the groups, whether we stick with 4 or move to 3. What would?
I think 4 is still okay.
Yeah.
But I suppose just how are we going to help Paul? Have we got a plan for that being online? Cool.
Yeah, we've got a plan for that. We'll work with Paul to include him in one of the groups on a laptop.
Cool. Thank you.
So just going through the 3 groups. So the group with Olivia as the facilitator is Chair Pauline, together with Councillor Edge and Councillor Mackay. Then working with myself, Deputy Chair Swiggs, with Councillor Robinson and Councillor Kurako. Then working with Cecilia, we've got Councillors Sunkel, Davies and Southworth. And then the final group working with Patrick as the facilitator, Councillor Scott, Councillor Cranwell, and we'll include Councillor Diche online in that group.
Thank you.
All right, so whoever wants to nab the councillor.
Yep, for sure. Let's
Yes,
ask
any
a question
questions?
if you want.
I'll just note that on that workshop outline, 11 till 12:30 are breakout groups, are not live streamed or audio recorded.
Well, we can't because we're all going to be split
No,
up.
I'm just saying. I just wanted to say that out loud because the public who might be listening, it's not on the page. So it's probably good that they know.
Yeah, so we're going to have a certain screen that's up while we're doing the... Yeah, so it's going to be the whole council room so people can see us if they really want to watch us. But obviously the key thing will be the report back at 1 o'clock where people can zoom back in or watch that again and pick it up. We did think about that, but it is tough when we're all in different parts of the room. You're just going to hear murmurs, really. But the report back at 1 will be really important for the public side of it. Thank you. Cool. Any other questions?
I'd also just note that we've got a few extra resources at the table as well. We've got table of all the sort of Canterbury Council data, the population, number of elected members, budgets, land area, so forth. Got the summary of the Wild Window report, position statements, and copies of the models as well. So
Cool. Thanks, team. So does group 1 maybe want to go out in the council lounge? Group 2 maybe somewhere here, group 3 and 4 on that side, something like that, and we'll go from there. Does everyone remember what group they're in? Cowboy?
The list is here if you're not sure.
Following.
Would you like to, so do you want to perhaps use this table here? Yeah. Would that be?
We'll go.
Like this might give you a bit more room. Yes, you are with me. So we're going to make it around here. We thought that's a good space. So, yeah. I know how much you love to do.
Jesus, Jesus, Jesus.
Oh, now the colours. Oh, yeah.
Should we just go to the pub? Yeah. Where are we?
You can go to the pub afterwards. After you've done your work.
This is live stream.
Sorry.
That's okay. That's all right. Absolutely. We allow that. Cecilia, what were you thinking as the next group comes through?
I think. Who's the scribe? You're the scribe?
Right. Let's try and organise your ideas. Well, I'm going to try and encourage you to put your thoughts down on these, because the way it's going to work is capture your ideas, because then at the break, so you're blue, your group blue. So that will mean that we move around, all your groups will know which groups, and then we're going to kind of try and pull them together. So after lunch, we're going to have those 4 dimensions, and then we'll try and get everyone's ideas up on that, and then we'll be able to see each group's placement. So if you can put your ideas down onto these, then I get capture them. Does that make sense? No, you don't need to put an initial. If you'd like to put your initial, but you otherwise just capture ideas. So, yes, that's good. Right, okay, so we're focusing on yeah, so why don't we just, and we've got some questions here.
And so can you,
so here's the concept. So are there any questions about this concept?
can we,
I can scribble as well. Yeah,
can clarify
absolutely.
the membership of those councils?
Elected mayor, ward
Yeah.
councillors,
Yeah. Yes, and that's why I've actually got Leon in mind, because he knows the models quite well. You know, because we've had some discussions on the chair as the deputy chair as well.
Yeah.
But if you come back, so the unitary councils obviously we've got examples of that already that exists with Auckland and around and there's so why don't we start off just, either first thoughts, or if you want to focus on a particular area, so in terms of scale of delivery, what are some of the pros and cons of this model? Like if we in Canterbury went to a unitary authority.
Well, it can lead to distances between the government and the communities.
Yeah, so that's so
Yeah, I know someone who was a Romney district councillor and then became a unitary Auckland, was demise of those relationships. So the government bodies have their own local.
So there's a kind of a breakdown in local democracy. Because of that.
Very much. To the point that
So it's less democratic.
Would you mind?
Yep. Well, kia ora koutou. We've just done our 4 different workshops with the 4 groups, looking at the 4 different scenarios. So we're going to break for lunch now, and then at 1:00ish we're coming back and having a feedback session, which the staff are going to do some work over lunch to look at and bring back to us. So we'll close out this bit and come back at 1:00. Thank you. Oh, kia ora koutou, welcome back. I'll just come back in after our break, and we're going to soon move to a bit of a feedback session on the 4 different scenarios. I'll hand over to staff in a minute. I think what we're going to do, we've got roughly an hour left, and we do have something at 2 o'clock, so we're going to maybe spend about 10 minutes on each scenario, and that includes a bit of a feedback from a staff member in terms of what the themes are about each model. And then we'll have a chance to have a quick discussion amongst councillors about any other feedback that may have not been picked up through that session. But we'll have to keep the time, so we'll keep moving on. And then that will leave us a little bit of time at the end if we want to do any further wrap-ups about thoughts from councillors on the models that we've discussed. Does that sound good, councillors? Ka pai? Okay, hand over to you, Olivia.
Kia ora. So I'm just going to take the slide back to the model that we're starting on. So this was the combined council model. So just to remember, this is the model which has sort of cascading representation. There's 10 local councils electing a mayor, and that's principally for placemaking decisions. And then there's a combined council with 10 mayors and a regional council chair. And the idea is that this maintains connections between those different layers of government. So in terms of the 4 dimensions, the key themes we sort of heard through this discussion around scale of delivery. We heard this model offers a better ability to negotiate with central government, given our size and regional representation. The model most closely aligns with the direction of resource management reform in terms of spatial and regional focus, and it may deliver some benefits in terms of transitioning. There are, though, some potential challenges around the time commitment required, noting that for this model, elected members will need to be across a broad range of issues at different scales. And there were also some questions we heard around the distribution of functions. Do these sit at the right level and scale to maximise economies of scale and to avoid duplication? So then when we come to strategic capacity, which was the second dimension, some of the themes that came through were that this model retains the benefit of a strong strategic regional lens that provides some coherency. It ensures alignment between regional and territorial decision making. It also allows elected members to be potentially focused on the important role of governance rather than operational decisions. But there were some concerns expressed around decision-making arrangements, particularly around that issue of how do you make sure that the environmental and the development considerations are weighted evenly. One of the other benefits was potential for having fewer members means the better ability to compensate elected members, and this may attract people with additional skill sets and expertise. And then finally on to the last 2 themes, so financial sustainability. There was a strong theme that for this model to be financially sustainable, some amalgamation is needed, but potentially compared to the other models, it was more sustainable. Some benefits were that elected members identified that it had greater specificity around the functions, but there was also some expression that still there's too many elected members, and potentially for this to be sustainable into the future, we need to be thinking about amalgamation and be live to the signals around rate pegging that's coming from government. And lastly, on community responsiveness, there were concerns that this model was potentially less democratic, and where the voice for local communities lies in this model was a big question. Also a question around the agility of the model. How well does this respond to local issues, given it's more of a regionally focused model? And where is the mandate from local communities to act? So those are sort of the strong themes that came through, and pass over to councillors if they wish to add anything more.
Kia ora, Olivia, thank you for that. Councillors, do you have any other thoughts you wanted to share from that summary about this one? Yep, John?
I guess the representative part of the 10 mayors, there is that expectation that there will be amalgamation. So what does that governance look like if we have 2 or 3 or 4 unitary authorities? Where does the power sit? So that's a real challenge for me. So I think we're looking in at the world through the lens of today. There won't be 10 local authorities. So theoretically it works, but I just don't see what it will look like into the future is the challenge for me in particular.
Oh, yeah. Genevieve?
There was conversation about it being quite like the mayoral forum, and that I guess it would be quite a strong emphasis on governance as opposed to input from local groups. I think it's a lot of mayors and one chair in quite a big role, and I think it may have less adaptability than some of the other ones we've got in front of us. So although there's some good elements to it, there's a lot of words and not much teasing out yet. It'd be good to see it maybe pulled out a bit more. And mana whenua, I think, in this day and age needs to have more of a role to play than what we put on paper. It really needs to be better than this.
Thanks, Genevieve. Any other thoughts, councillors, on this combined council model? I think it's, obviously has some potential, and I think what Genevieve and John have said is totally right. And, the cascading effect of having it collectivised, so the responsibilities are shared, even though there's different levels of delegations at that local level versus the regional level. But the main thing is that everybody's working together on the same waka. That's what I quite like about this model. But yeah, there's still lots of questions and challenges, of course. Peter?
Yeah, thanks. Look, my consistent thought about all these models is the amount of people that are still involved. 124 members in this model and even more in some of the other models. And one of the things that the Future of Local Government looked at is actually giving people more remuneration so that we attracted, I'm not saying present companies accepted here, okay, but we have a better depth of talent, if you like, at the table, and a 4-year term for that, and it gives a more of a consistent approach to actually committing yourself to local government. We've had that discussion in here, I don't know how many times, about is this a full-time role, is it a part-time role, whatever it is. I think we need to establish whatever we move to as a full-time role for those people. I think we need to fund it accordingly, and I think we need to give people a length of time that they can consider the issues in front of them. So that's what I would say generically as one of my views. And the other view that I had across all of these models is, and I've changed my mind pretty dramatically on this actually from what I first spoke about it, was I think a major issue that we have is consenting. And when you talk to people outside of the building, it's a bit like the fox in the hen house. It's a bit like judge and jury, that those things sit within the same council. Now, I can make a really good, strong case for that also, why it should be like that, and probably have actually in the past. But I think one of the things that we're seen as is we're seen as the judge and jury on some of these things, and I think that's getting in the road of what we need to do. I think the other functions around those things that we should be part of, because essentially when you go into a consenting process, it is in the matter of natural justice between you and an authority. Those things sometimes get done on your behalf if you're applying one with a consultant, and sometimes they get heard by an external party. I think the most important thing around these things, and I think that function could sit essentially somewhere else. I think the most important thing about that is that the interpretation under your consent of the RMA process that you're going through and the regional and sub-regional plan is the most important thing, and a consistency around that is something that that we all want if we're applying for a consent. I don't know if that's seen on the outside. So when we're looking at solutions for what we've got, I think that we also got to look at some of the hurdles that may be impediments, and that's just a thought, actually.
I'll move on.
I just wanted to add a voice into that. The problem definition around all this is representation and governance, yes, and how does the functions of the things we do be governed. But one thing I was really, with what Peter just said, I kind of have a different view and an opposite view, which is not helpful, but it also could be helpful, is the question that I've got in my mind is that do councillors need to be full-time governing board members? Is that the role of a councillor? And so if we're thinking about the structure and who governs what and how does it get governed, we've all had conversations around this table, and sometimes some of us have said that the best governing model that we've got in a regional council, maybe not the best, is Taranaki Regional Council, who only have a meeting once or twice a month. And everybody's going, yeah, that's what we need here. Is that a full-time role? No, it's not. But we've just got so much to read and so much to understand. So is the actual role of the governor the issue? And the role of having to read copious amounts of information all the time? Maybe AI can help that and replace that role for us, which would be interesting. But when it comes to these combined councils, I agree with what John was saying. When it says 10 local councils, you've got a capacity issue. Can those 10 local councils stay the way they are? And so we need to be thinking about amalgamation of local governance as well, and the role of the governor in that space, because they don't have water, or potentially in the next 10 years they won't have to deal with the water. So there's a third of a lot of councils' workload has already disappeared. If we don't have to deal with RMA or something, or public transport, who does that work? Somebody still needs to govern that work, but is a councillor a full-time role? And that's a question that I'd throw into the mix.
I think that is a question around do you need democratically elected councillors to govern all the different functions? Maybe there's some functions that don't need that, or they can be connected but at arm's length. But anyway, let's get into some of that at the end, because let's focus on the models so we can get through it, and then we can bring up generic comments at the end if that's useful. So let's go to the next one. Thank you, Olivia. And who am I handing to? Emma? The unitary.
The second model that we looked at was 3 different forms of based around a unitary council. So the first one there set up with 10 unitary councils, second one with a sort of a regional Greater Christchurch council and boundaries based on the district councils, and then there the option with a South Mid and North Canterbury. The feedback for this was in particular sort of commented that there was potential for a lot of duplication, and that one feedback was questions around it being financially sustainable. And the options 2 and 3, there was recognition that they provide potentially for some functional efficiencies and efficiencies around scale, but would need to have a look a little more closely at the boundaries, was a comment. There was a theme around where do the interests lie, and what would the Unitary Council be sort of focused on? How would you maintain a focus on the sort of significant infrastructure and strategic issues while ensuring that you were still considering sort of the functions at a more local level, and how you balanced those out and making sure that there was representative voice for all issues relevant to the communities? So that were the comments under scale of delivery. In terms of financial sustainability, there was recognition that central government funding is still key, and that also really to achieve functional sustainability, the unitary model needed to be on a scale and large enough that it delivered on that, rather than some of the, like the option A, which still has a large number. And the other theme was around a balanced funding across the region. So looking at how that's achieved across the different communities in Canterbury. Looking at strategic capacity, here there was a point about how we ensure sort of competition for talent and expertise, talking to that, how do we deliver on the sort of the complexity of issues faced by Canterbury, and how do we ensure that under the model. There was a discussion around mana whenua representation, and that how could we ensure that, and options for co-governance, and again just ensuring really the strategic voice for Canterbury is maintained in all across all the functions like CDM, science. And that really lends into the final dimension around community responsiveness. There was quite a bit of feedback about how do you ensure capturing local groups' interests and the localism, and how do you ensure that there's that balance. The theme came through that's under a unitary model, there's could be the perception of less ability to reflect communities' individual needs and localism, and there's the potential for the Canterbury collective identity to be lost, and that's both across outcomes and also different economic models depending on the region. So that, in essence, captures the feedback from across the 4 groups.
Thanks, Emma. Really good. Any comments, people? John? Yep.
I'll start. Looking at the middle option, there was Joe, Vicky and myself, and how does Christchurch City impact is the question, and my view is that it impacts too much across the rest of Canterbury. But Vicky and Joe just then had a view that the rest of it is important to Christchurch, and the impact, whether it's water, enough hasn't been done in the Waimaka area to protect the water supply, so Christchurch needs to have the ability to influence. But I see kind of the urban area as being the urban area, and the ultimate answer would be the rest of Canterbury is one big unitary. But it's an interesting conversation where we go, so what is the role of Christchurch and its influence on the rest of Canterbury, and the belief that it should have quite a significant influence on Canterbury because it's where Canterbury started, and it affects this and it does that, and transports. There's a whole bunch of questions rolled into there, and we get that kind of urban, rural, provincial kind of debate happening in this room of what does it mean. It does create a challenge, and I absolutely agree. I don't think unitary authorities will prioritise environment or the greater good, or how do you have a Canterbury perspective. So it's a real challenge for me in this process.
Thanks, John. Yep, Peter?
Look, I think there's a lot of an emotional support, probably for the last one from people I've spoken to anyway, but it is exceedingly lazy way of looking at how you reform. And I think it doesn't take into account the nuances that we understand in this room that others don't understand. And I would take to task ministers on their views on unitary. I mean, a classic example, although she's not a minister, is Kate Nimmin. When I met Kate and James Meagher down looking at the Waitakere Lagoon with Dion, and I said to her, so Kate, what do you think about the local government reform? She said, unitary is a good way to go. I said, that's default. That is, everyone says that. So I think that from my point of view, and we may end up there, I don't know, but we should shelve that discussion about unitaries from this council's perspective, because I don't think it's helpful. And I think that we should do some really intense thinking about a couple of these models. There's a couple of them that I don't think will work, but that's my view on this. Let's not be lazy here.
Thanks, Peter. Genevieve?
Yeah, I sort of picked that from the discussion as well, that it's not only sort of not much thought put into it, but it's actually better in a more complex, better and less complex environments. And that's just worldwide sort of assessment of unitaries. And then it also talks about it can lead to huge distancing between the authority and local communities and their needs. And there's so many negatives about this. But yeah, it works probably in some situations, but definitely it wouldn't here.
Thanks, Genevieve. Dion?
I tend to support what Peter was saying, but at the same time, I also would counter that, saying that unitary is the only other option in the legislation at the moment. And it is the only other option that people will talk about. So naturally, I think we have to talk about it because it is the other option, the only other option. But what we need to say is that does unitary work for Canterbury? And as I said in our discussions at the moment, when you look at what's happening in our colleagues up in the northern part of the South Island at the moment, and I really have a lot of sympathy for what's happened with their flooding right now. And they've got unitary councils, and their communities have been telling them, look at our flood resilience, and they haven't quite got on top of that because there's a whole lot of other stuff that those councils have to look at. It's not a failure of any individual people, but it's the system. Does it work? You have to ask questions there, and we've got some very major rivers down in this part of the region that if we don't look after those and monitor those the way that a regional council looks at those, we'll have problems. Or potential problems down the track. So, yes, I think we have to look at it, but we have to look at what we've got and how they're working at the moment and how they may not be working in the context of Canterbury. I do add this also in the middle one there. I look at that and go, our region has very distinct issues in terms of our rural part of our region and then our urban part. And as an urban-based councillor, I have very little... not work, but very little influence in global consent stuff that the Christchurch City Council deals with through their, the stuff that we would naturally deal with through their global consents. I have very little influence in that because that's squarely off to the City Council. So is there something in there that we need to tease out? Because it's already by default happening through those global consents. But yes, I think 10 unitary councils is very much not going to work because you're not going to have 10 river engineers, 10 biodiversity officers that do all that work, 10 harbour masters throughout the region. It would just be silly.
Thanks, Dion. Vicky, and then Claire.
Firstly, just to the point that John raised, I'm not sure I was quite as clear-cut about that. I mean, the question I posed to John was that, we've got braided rivers, we've got biodiversity values, we've got aquifers, which there's a public good in all of that. It's there for the nation. I mean, it's not individuals, and it's not only here for now and people alive today, but for the future. So shouldn't the population more broadly in this region have a say in how that's all managed? It's not just about those who happen to live right directly next to these, phenomenal iconic braided rivers, for example. I think there is a need to have a broader voice contributing. I'm very inclined to agree with Peter that the unitary, there will be plenty of people out there already advocating for unitary and putting the case for unitary. So I think we should focus our attention on what's an alternative that we feel, with our knowledge and experience of working as regional councillors, what looks like it would work well, and which are the things that are the most critical that stay regional are brought into a model that we can put forward as a good alternative to unitary, and work from that sort of philosophy. Cool. So I just put that there.
Thanks, Vicky. Claire?
Yeah, I think this 2 and 3 were quite closely aligned, but our table, and I speak for Grant and Craig, the conversation that was raised certainly by Grant and I particularly was around maintaining the key functions, which I think you've just sort of touched on, to Vicky, of what are the functions that an organisation such as ourselves has expertise and experience, and that applies regionally. And I know I was quite persistent about the fact that the context, and John, you touched on it before around, is that we're talking about what's there today, but local government, the TAs will also be looking at, or probably even have to do in time, do some amalgamation. So there will be, I imagine, less TAs I do think that communities of interest is really important, and currently Christchurch City already actually has control of its rivers, or the majority of rivers in within the Christchurch City boundary, and that was because in the catchment board days that they didn't actually come back to the regional council. So for me, I see it wouldn't be too difficult to make the Christchurch City sort of a unitary, but then have some sort of amalgamation or simplification of the TAs, and then have, I definitely agree that we need some sort of overarching environmental organisation or entity.
Thanks, Claire. Look, I think it's been really good to put this forward. Like Dion said, it is the one that people have talked about. But I think this, even the slide shows people that it's not as easy as that. And I definitely think in our group, like similar to other groups, A just seems totally unworkable. B and C maybe, like maybes, but you'd have to do a lot of work to understand how that's actually beneficial. And the main thing I think that I heard Emma say is, and I agree, is you just lose a bit of collectiveness across Canterbury, and you set up a bit of a potential competition between the three. And I don't know if that's helpful unless you have some other structure that you collectively get together and do shared services or whatever. So there's some maybes and some potential, but I think it shows that it's not, and what I'm hearing, that it's not the most favoured one out of all of them. But let's get through them first, and we'll come back to that. So let's go to number 3. Thanks, Emma.
So, kia ora, councillors. Yeah, so this was the Regional Environmental Leadership Body. So this is the 50-50 appointed and elected regional body focusing on the environmental planning and permissioning functions, and local councils focusing on more of the place-based functions, with the provision there in terms of the regional and sub-regional entities. And central government entities providing service to the regions through compliance and science services. So in terms of scale of delivery, there was benefits seen in this in terms of providing sort of more clarity on the functions across the different bodies, and potentially less duplication, noting that it was consistent with the position statement around environmental management, and maintains that kind of regional strategic responsibility. There was a bit of conversation about sort of the science functions, and that should remain at the regional layer, as it's really fundamental to the environmental functions at the regional layer. And there was a suggestion around sort of having centres of excellence for your science monitoring, engineering functions, and then providing those at the regional scale. In terms of strategic capacity, I felt that this model could retain the skill sets and knowledge and connections on strategic issues that don't fit naturally within any sort of boundary, but crosses boundaries. It's noted about having benefits and having the 50-50 in terms of expertise, and sort of depoliticising the entity may increase the chance of having conversations with consecutive governments for strategic long-term decision-making, and the ability to deliver on spatial planning at a local level, but with that regional direction. In terms of the financial sustainability, again, there was just a bit of conversation that we've already come up through the other ones, in terms of what's the assumption we're making about the number of TAs and the number of elected members. There was some consideration that it might provide some certainty for the future and stability in terms of that decision making. And the joint entities were seen as an opportunity for savings, bringing together sort of sound financial advice and nous, and enabling others to focus on those decisions-making functions. And again, just a bit of dependency on how it's set up with its rates, but felt that that kind of rating system would generally work, and it was a good model for co-investment opportunities with and conversations with the Crown. And in terms of community responsiveness, there was concerned about the appointed members and loss of that kind of democratic accountability, and if community would engage with that. But again, going back to the scale of delivery, like that clarity of functions may also increase community's understanding about the different roles at different layers. And a good opportunity in terms of mana whenua representation, and a bit of understanding about how the collaboration would work, and working with communities of interest in those engagement processes.
Thanks, Cecilia. Comments yet, Genevieve?
I've sort of commented a lot today, haven't I? My goodness. I'm not a fan of this one at all. Sorry. But the appointed members I have real concerns about, mostly because of what you mentioned before, Cecilia, and I think there's an inclination for the public to perhaps think there's a narrative there or an agenda of those appointed. It would all come down to the scrutiny or the method of appointing those particular people, and what would their kudos be, or qualifications, or their own personal agenda. So I think it's changing the face of democratic processes. My other comment in that particular setting was that if there's anyone that's going to sit at the table with us, it still should be mana whenua rather than appointed people. And it should be probably changing the numbers in there from representing all the different runanga. So it'd be 10 people along with 10 elected members. And I guess the technical expertise you mentioned, like engineers and the like, should come from a similar, like a technical pool that actually assists in many settings, not just ours, and then it would lower costs, and then they'd be available for other things like sort of like Health New Zealand does with some of their specialist doctors that to and from different boards. That's how I would see it.
Thanks, Genevieve. I'll go Peter, Dion, and John, and then Grant. Where you go, Peter?
Yeah, I've got some sympathy for this model. I've worked obviously in the commissioner model, and I know that the democratic process seems to be impeded upon. However, I don't think that you need 8. I think maybe 6-10, 10 elected members, 6 appointed members. And I think that if you were going to appoint members, then the TAs would have a say in that, not the minister. So there would be a locally appointed members. 2 of those could be mana whenua if they change the rule. But I think the thing that we need to look at, just like we've got mana whenua representation at this table, is that it allows us to actually see things a bit more clearly when people are in the room. And so if we had some expertise in things like, for an example, just a really crazy example is that if we had an economist in the room, we could get some view on some of the things we're talking about from an economic impact point of view. So I'm not going to go any deeper than that, but that's what I'd say about that. I think one of the other really good things about this model is that you don't look to change local councils. I think the 10 local councils need to look to change themselves, actually. And my firm belief on this is that local water done well, where it's headed at the moment, if you're following that along the way, is everyone's going back into their corners and doing their own things. And I think that we'll get a sense of what's going to happen from central government by about when we're nearly ready to be elected again, because that'd be the time to strike if I was a minister about doing something about that. So I wouldn't dismiss this completely. I think it needs some more conversation. I know I went through John and Claire and Yayan. Actually, Yayan and I were in the same group when we talked about this, and you should say what you said, because I think that enlightens some of the stuff that we were doing. But I think we were attacked really strongly by people saying it's anti-democratic, and possibly it was, but achieved a few things that needed to be achieved, and then dropping it, actually we lost something, and I think it was attacked from the point of view that the Minister of the Environment had the say, and not local communities about appointed people. Anyway, leave it at that.
Thanks, Peter. Dion, and then John. Grant?
It is interesting when you think about local democracy and what's happening with the Christchurch City Council at the moment with their building consent, not building consent, their district plan and PC 14, I think, and not actually having a say ultimately. So there is that layer of central government stuff in this model. But what I was, the notes when I was writing up the other day, and because I wasn't in the thingy, was the function and the connection between the other regional entities and how they look was something that I was quite a little bit concerned about when we're thinking about this, and there was no mention of civil defence and who does those functions and how that interacts with other regional planning bodies, because this is just about environmental, but what about your public transport, and if they're carved off, is that a separate regional body? And so you've got maybe 4 or 5 regional bodies that all have different governing structures, and that's a very expensive exercise. The other note that I had was the funding model of it. This one I don't think was very well thought about when it comes to funding model. Who would fund it? Would it be ratepayers, or would it be a levy, or would it be central government mix? There's a lot of different ways that this could be funded, and especially when the problem definition that we've started with is funding for local government. I had a lot of question marks over this particular one, and the other one was when I was thinking about this, it was because you'd have a whole lot of different regional bits. Potentially there'd be the risk of green tape, so another layer of bureaucracy that, rather than having outcomes and focusing on outcomes, you're focusing on governance and bureaucracy and those type of things. So that was just my 2 cents that I had for this one.
Thanks, Dion. John?
Thanks. I probably like this model the best of the 4 that we have out there. And having worked in the mixed model of appointed and elected, I can see some real benefits in having both parties at a table. No issue with Peter's idea that it might be 6-10 or whatever, and provide a balance where the elected outweigh the appointed. But I see real value in that. And then looking at the 10 councils, it won't be 10 councils in the future, but it doesn't really matter whether there's 10 councils or 4 councils. If they all amalgamate, it doesn't affect the role of this regional entity. And I guess the perfect world for me would be this regional entity with a bit of science and CDAM thrown in that has an overarching view of Canterbury, and maybe for amalgamated territorial authorities, a city, a north, a mid, and a south, or something like that would tick a whole lot of boxes for me. But I guess in a regional space, I guess I like this one the best, and it ensures that we are connected with our TAs, we're connected with our science and sort of events and a bunch of things that sit in there. So for me, the funding isn't a great issue. We can work through those things and where some of those other entities sit.
Thanks, John. Grant, and then Jan, we'll move on.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, look, I kind of agree with John to some extent. This is one that appeals to me a wee bit more, could be worked on a wee bit more. Appointed members, but I think Councillor Scott sort of mentioned, well, that could be an agreed appointments from local people. That might be fine, but yeah, a different split, 8-8, not so sure. I think democracy is pretty important for people in Canterbury. We've had the commissioner approach and people just didn't like that at all. I like the retention of the regional function. I think this is about functioning across the region, especially for environmental issues and natural resource management, and that needs to have a wider perspective across multiple places in Canterbury. And so I personally, I think there's an opportunity here, which is what it's saying, is that perhaps local councils, they may be some amalgamation because of a scaling issue, but also a refinement of the functions that they operate on. At the moment, everybody does a district plan and everybody's doing certain things. Shifting them to a wider regional body with potentially overcomes that duplication. And the idea of some joint planning, joint administration of things like roading and transport and public, water services. So that sounds like quite a good idea too, and those shared partnerships and things like that. The one thing that's a bit unclear, and it was mentioned in the Future for Local Government report, was the idea of a crown being involved in a closer involvement with the Crown, perhaps a new department or whatever set up so that there's more engagement between the Crown and regional governance, especially, and how that can be a bit more not only in funding, but assistance with funding, with function as well. Look, that's the main thing. And in terms of funding, I kind of look at some of the recommendations on that Future for Local Government, and one of them is, those wellbeing things, transfer of revenue equivalent to GST charged on rates, significant funding for supporting local priorities, place-based agreements, devolution of roles. So that subsidiarity issue needs to be strong in terms of the rate base and the tax base. The difference is growing over time, and it's just providing inequity across New Zealand, and the South Island especially are not getting their share of things. So I think that there's scope there for further discussions about that.
Thanks, Grant. Yeah.
Kia ora. It's hard to say this, but I actually agree with Councillor Scott, Councillor Sucknell and Councillor Edge. Wow, geez, it's what's going on in this world. But yeah, probably out of the four, four examples put forward, this one kind of really speaks to myself. I really like having the CCOs and taking those functions out. And then, as Councillor Edge mentioned before, just having that regional body, and Councillor Sunknell having that regional body that actually is there to look at those areas and those issues, and they've already discussed that. But one of the reasons why I really like this as well is the mixed model, having the appointed and councillors, and then also, especially for mana whenua, that means that they can come in as easy as as an appointed member. You don't have to have, if this model did go through, you wouldn't have to have outside legislation, different legislation to really have mana whenua at the table. It'll just be a part of that process of having the elected members, but also the 8 appointed members, and then also plus mana whenua, what that looks like. It'd be good to have a few more mana whenua instead of, say, if it is 2 at the moment, more of an equal number, but that, we can work about that looking forward. But in a sense, I kind of like this model. And as mentioned before, I don't think it'd be 10 local councils. I think they would have to be less. And what that looks like, I'm not too sure. But, amalgamation probably will have to happen. Kia ora.
Kia ora koutou. Hey, look, really good feedback. It's good to hear people supportive of some of the things in this one. Look, the main thing for me is really bringing that planning and permissions together. I think that's a really smart move. I've said it before in different forums that we've been in around the resource management system, and what I actually think, from a personal view, is a bit broken, having that arbitrary split. So that's what I like. Plus biosecurity, biodiversity, as we know, between TAs and regions, we sort of don't know quite where the line is on those issues, but if you make it clear, I think that helps everybody. And I think the idea of some entities to do different infrastructure provision, etc., I think has got some benefits, and potentially how that connects back to a partnership with central government is really important. So great stuff. Let's go to the last one. We've got 17 minutes, so we should get there with a little bit of time to have a round-up discussion. And so thanks, councillors, thanks, staff. Let's carry on. Thanks, Patrick.
Kia ora, thank you. So this is the wildcard model, the Canterbury Assembly model that has sort of hyper-local community board structures that feed up to a large assembly that has a regional mayor. And this model also proposed that the Assembly would exercise most of the legislative and regulatory functions in the region, with those community councils having very sort of place-based focused approaches there. In terms of scale of delivery, your comments had some concern around coordination, about how it will be quite difficult to coordinate functions at such a high-level organisation at that Canterbury Assembly. it could be difficult to do effective governance, and it could be difficult to do effective oversight of delivery. You also proposed some devolution of functions to that local level. There was the impression that there was too much being focused at that regional level and not enough powers that were or functions that were sitting at that community level. Around the strategic capacity, you had some comments that this would enable potentially greater connection and coherency across the whole region, because it's one model with different chunks that tier together, the sort of nesting inside each other. You noted that it might be difficult to have decision making with the number of elected members in that assembly. There were a lot of comments around there being too many elected members to be able to perform those functions correctly. And you noted that there will be a significant change to the role and focus of what a councillor is in this model compared to what it currently is now, which might result in changes to who stands or who participates in democracy. On the community responsiveness, there were some notes around mana whenua representation and the Assembly requiring mana whenua representation, which was good, and some comments around how this model might enable easier Ngāi Tahu involvement at the regional level, because there's one body to be involved in. There were some notes around population, around how population can't be the only defining factor for representation. So what was proposed here was community councils being around a certain number of population. There were a lot of comments around that would skew things if it was only based on population, and several comments around size of region or environmental issues or other things being considerations for what representatives are appointed to represent. But there was continued support for that alignment and hierarchy between different councils and parts of this component. And lastly, around the financial sustainability, there were a couple of comments around potentially higher transition costs, because this is quite a significant change from the status quo. But honestly, most of your comments weren't around financial or service delivery. This was a very representation-focused conversation, which I think is useful.
Kia ora, Patrick. Thank you. Yep, Peter, let's go.
Yeah, so I may have wrongly deemed this being sort of more like a Greater Manchester model than what it actually is. But I think there is some merit in hanging on to the ideas that Canterbury is a whole of a region, and better connectivity to the people in that region under a single body, from my point of view, is important. And if you listen to Andy Burnham, who's the mayor of the Greater Manchester model, one of the things that they were trying to achieve when they put that in place was that connectivity back to their citizens through the model as it was established. And the benefits are huge if you can get that right, because you do have a consensus across a wider range of things. And I think that, from my personal opinion, this needs to be pushed wider than just Canterbury. In fact, for Tiwai Pounamu model, because I think the gains that you can make by having those relationships are the gains that Greater Manchester has made, and the Greater Manchester has made the gains of being able to speak directly to Whitehall about funding. They don't have to go through agencies. They're not competing with each other. They set their expectations in the Greater Manchester area of what they require, and they go directly to Whitehall to get that funds. And from Whitehall's point of view, it's easier because they're dealing with one entity. Now, I don't think that Greater Manchester model. I know Sammy's got a wee bit of sympathy for it, but I don't think. I think it's too early for us to actually think about that. But essentially, I think that those are the things that we should be thinking about. We should be thinking about a form that gives better results for the functions that we require. And, we've done it badly in New Zealand. Auckland's a classic example of where the functions that we hold have not been served well up there. But I think maybe 3 years of talking about a different model for us will help us get to where we need to get to.
Thanks, Peter. I'll go back to you after.
Yeah, I was just to sort of throw into the mix, like, we're very much coming at this, understandably, as elected representatives, thinking about I suspect we're all sort of imagining, well, what would it look like if I was one of those elected representatives in that sort of cluster and all there. And in our conversations, Joe mentioned particularly around digital democracy, talks about referendums. Now, I'm not a great fan of referendums coming from the UK and having watched Brexit and the polarisation and all the fallout from that. But I've been reading and listening to a bit about Audrey Tang and Taiwan and the sort of democracy, and calling it like day-to-day democracy and engaging citizens more and actually having people well informed, part of the decision-making process, consultation ongoing through a council term, not just did the elected representative that I voted for, could I even see what they really did, and do I agree with what they did? Actually in participating, and I feel like we're almost building this in an old school way, thinking about it in the current way we do things. But actually, I think the digital democracy stuff, if you start putting that into this mix and thinking, how does it look if we try to ensure that our citizens really understand what we're doing, what the issues are, how they can contribute to the conversation, and have a feeling, grow that feeling that citizens can have influence and be part of the conversation ongoing. I think maybe we need to have a little bit. Audrey Tang and the Taiwanese examples is really interesting. I think we should be looking at some of that.
Cool. John?
I'm really interested in the Taiwanese model because I've been talking to a chap that lived there for some time and his wife is Taiwanese, and you pay the building superintendent, and if you pay the most, then that building votes for you, and the building next door votes for someone else because they've paid them off more. So yeah, I'm a wee bit concerned about the democracy of Taiwan at times, but that's an aside. I have some sympathy for this, but I just don't see how it will work when we have some of our communities rising up and trying to tip councils over because they are not being heard in their little 2 square kilometres of whatever. So how it might come about. The community council, if I start there, far too many. I would see more of the territorial authorities, whatever form they are, becoming kind of the democracy vehicle, and some of those functions going sideways into the assembly, and those become the voice, those elected people out of those communities becoming the voice. I'm not sure how you would get 20 community councils representing their views into a council table. That's one every day of the working month and rotating through. So I just think, I'm not sure how it works. And 20 elected members, I'm probably keen on 10 elected members. So the hypothetical works, but I'm just not convinced that it would ever go down, given the views of people in democracy and localism.
Cool. Genevieve?
I was really listening to that. I actually, got quite excited about this particular model, as most of us in our group did. Maybe Dion not quite so much, but I actually thought it was really good, something to start with anyway, because it gives more people a voice. But the concern I had was probably a regional mayor situation. I think it needs to be more than just that. The rest of it I'm pretty okay with. I think reflecting too on like the state of Victoria in Australia, where they have different boroughs, and based on those boroughs, they have quite strategic groups of people doing things with the funding they receive and the actions they do and the results they achieve. And that's the sort of thing I could see happening from this, is actually quite clear groups doing their thing. And that's what I think. I think it's open to a good framework if we put it in place right before we actually start with it. But, working along those lines. But yeah, that's all I've got to say.
Genevieve.
Thanks.
Was that Dion? Did you have your hand up? Yep.
It's not so much that I don't like this model. My thoughts were that I don't think governance is mature enough in Canterbury in isolation for this. I actually see this model as a South Island model, a Te Waipounamu assembly. where we could actually fight for the South Island as a whole. We've got 1 million people. I think 1 million people in the South Island is about right for having a South Island Assembly. Then you can bring in Ngāi Tahu as a true partner in that, and then talk with Te Atiawa up in the top of the South around what they're doing, and feeding them into that. And then that Te Atiawa sort of link into the Wellington area, to really fight for the
and the others, Dion. Yeah.
Oh,
carry.
I'm just being selfish for myself here. But there's all sorts. But look, let's not go there because we'll get into tribal warfare. But that's where I see this model sitting, and I think that could be something that pops out of whatever happens with the RMA reforms and all of this talk and chatter, because I think this solves a problem for the South Island in the current central governance structure, especially because we've got a minister for the South Island. He needs somebody to do the work for him. So that's where I saw this, and the problem. Actually, I'll just leave it at that because I was going to go into a different space.
Just looking around, we've only got 5 minutes left. Grant, you make it brief. Be good.
Yep.
No, less than 5 minutes, like 2 minutes.
Look, one of the things that in all of this, for me, and I particularly like that working on that regional environment leadership body, but for the success of local democracy, there are a couple of things, and Peter Scott mentioned it in terms of the South Island thing. I have seen the idea of amalgamating regional councils, Southland, Otago, Canterbury, West Coast, Marlborough, Nelson. So that's another thing, and still keeping the functions that are pretty much going on here. I'm particularly, in terms of community voices, interested in spatial planning and how that might facilitate greater community engagement and better solutions at place. And that can be at a range of scales, larger scale, drilling down into where people live, how they manage their land and how they operate. So place-based solutions at scale in communities where people are involved, and where it directly affects them. So, and I think that the government have already, or the pre-government work, indicated spatial planning, and I think that we need to explore that within the context of what we're talking about today.
Thanks, Grant. Hey, I'll let you have a couple of minutes too, and then I'm going to wrap up.
Yeah, look, I just think that I'll keep my conversation quite high. I mean, it is interesting looking. I think my personal preference, or my greater interest, certainly lies in 3 and what that could look like if it was shaped. But I think that for me, it goes back and it's to ask the question of what we want to try and get out of this. What is our community telling us with what we're hearing in the media from the public? There is a lot of division out there. There's a lot of noise around rate rises or getting value for their dollar. There is, let's be honest here, a very small percentage of the folk actually vote in local democratic elections. In the national elections, far higher elections. So the question is how do we get people actually engaged? Do they actually want to be engaged? From a regional council perspective and the key functions that we do, I think you'll find if you went out into the rural areas, in provincial Canterbury, most people would know exactly what the roles of the regional council are. Go into our urban areas, urban centres in Christchurch City, for example, and far, far few people actually know what the role of the regional council is. I think most people would know what the role of their TA is or their city council is. So there's a lot of misunderstanding or a lot of information and awareness to be, and I think that those are the sorts of questions that we also need to be thinking about. What's the importance of them? Where do they fit in the process?
Hey, thanks, Claire. Hey, first of all, just want to say thanks to everybody. of course, our staff that have worked really hard over the lunch break to bring those summaries back to us, and of course, putting the whole scenario workshop together. So I just wanted to thank you, nei rā te mihi kia koutou mō koutou mahi I tēnei kaupapa. And of course, to our councillors who have participated and been involved, and I thought it was done in really good spirit, really open-minded, and that was the intention of it. And I think it's all important to highlight that no other council in the country is actually doing what we're doing. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. Not that we've been smart about it, I just think that's something that we've taken seriously from the start of the year, hearing the whispers that we've all heard, and trying to do something proactive about it. And I think what we've learnt today is that there are different ways it could be done, that the unitary model that's been talked about probably isn't the best model, especially for Canterbury. Not that saying that it couldn't work other places, but I think what this has shown, that what I've seen is the environmental leadership body had quite a lot of support. I'm not saying that's unanimous, but there's quite a lot of support there. And the other two, at the other extent, the Assembly and the Combined Council, not as much, but maybe some potential to look at that. And like Dion said, does that work for a South Island wide? I think that's quite an interesting discussion. And that what Grant said there about amalgamating regional councils should be thought about too, actually. That's something that we're really open about. So I think that's what it's shown, and what we need to be putting forward to government and to our communities and to our TA partners is that there is a different way to do this. And so I think that's the key thing that's come out today. And thank you so much again for everybody's input. I hope that the community that may be watching and may hear about this, I hope that's helped inform people better about the potential that there is here for all of local government, and of course the relationship with central government and mana whenua, and how that could be done best going forward. So just thanks everyone again, really appreciate our workshop that we've had. And in terms of next steps, look, let's I think sleep on these things and let's have us think about it. I know Dion and I will catch up with staff and have a think about next steps. We don't have anything concrete in mind, but obviously there has been some support for different aspects and particularly some models, so maybe there's a bit more work to be done. And obviously we don't know what the government's going to throw out in the next few weeks, few months, but at least we're ready with some comment from our council about where we could take some discussions. So thank you again. Kia ora. I know we've got another session with some... Vicky, are you going to do this one? Do you want to chair this one?
Okay.